Tonight, dear listener, we turn our gaze not to battles or roaring banquets, but to the quiet stirrings of a prophecy. Imagine with me the land of Argos, nestled under the shimmer of ancient constellations. The air is heavy with the scent of olive groves and distant sea winds, while torches flicker in palace courtyards, casting amber pools across marble floors. It is here that we meet King Acrisius, a man both proud and anxious, whose heart is troubled by the simple question of legacy, who will continue his line when he is gone. In the world of the Greeks, gentle dreamer lineage was not just a matter of family, it was the very breath of immortality. A name carried forward was a kind of victory against oblivion, the assurance that stories and sacrifices would echo on long after the body lay in the earth. Acrisius, though wealthy and powerful, had but one child, a daughter named Danae. No sons to wield sword or scepter, only Danae bright as dawn, capable and self-possessed. Yet in Acrisius's eyes, she seemed a fragile bridge to the future, uncertain, incapable, so he feared of carrying his line securely into the years ahead. So like many rulers of his time, Acrisius turned to the oracle. Picture him traveling to Delphi, where the smoke of laurel leaves curled upward in the temple, and the Pythia sat shrouded in mystery, murmuring the will of Apollo. The king knelt and asked what so many had asked. Before, would he have a son? Would the house of Acrisius endure? The oracle's answer was no balm to his worries. She told him that his daughter Danae would indeed bear a child, a son. Yet this grandson, born of her womb, would be Acrisius's undoing. He would kill the king of Argos, not in metaphor, not in gentle warning. No, the prophecy was sharp as a blade. And like all Greek prophecies, it was delivered with that tantalizing ambiguity, the kind that makes one wonder if fate is a cage or a mirror. Now, dear listener, let us rest a moment in that thought. In Greek imagination, fate Moira is both inexorable and strangely pliant. A person may twist and wrestle against it, but in doing so, often steps straight into its waiting arms. It is almost comic, if one lets a soft smile rise, how often these myths repeat the same refrain in trying to avoid destiny mortals hurry it along. Acrisius, however, was no philosopher. He was a king with a pounding heart and a crown that suddenly felt far too heavy. What would you have done, gentle dreamer, had such a doom been whispered into your ear? To take it calmly, perhaps, to shrug and trust the gods. Acrisius was made of more anxious clay. He could not kill his beloved daughter. Her blood was his own, and to shed it would draw curses from the heavens. Yet he also could not bear the thought that she might bear the child destined to end him. And so he devised a compromise both cruel and strangely cowardly. He had a prison built, not a dungeon dark and damp, but a chamber of gleaming bronze. Imagine it, walls polished to a dull golden glow, a ceiling through which the light of day barely filtered, and heavy doors sealed with iron. There, in that metallic womb, Danae was placed, locked away from every suitor, every whisper of love, every possibility of the child the oracle had promised. Some say it was a tower, high above the city, where the winds howled against her bars. Others tell it as an underground chamber, sealed beneath the earth, where even the stars could not console her. Myths are like rivers. Dear listener, they branch and weave, but they always lead to the same sea. What matters is that Danae, daughter of Argos, became the prisoner of her father's fear. And so she sat day after day, with only her thoughts for company. Perhaps she embroidered. Perhaps she sang softly to herself songs of the sea she could no longer see. Perhaps she counted the hours by the thin shafts of light that crept through her cell. For in myth, as in life, the cruelty of confinement is not the chains themselves, but the silence they enforce. Here we must pause and breathe, for it is a sorrowful image, a young woman, vibrant and full of life, reduced to a shadow by her father's dread. Yet there is also a strange poetry in it, for myths often begin with some kind of cage. The human spirit seems to demand it, that stories of transformation must first emerge from some narrow place, so that freedom when it comes is all the sweeter. If you have ever felt confined by another's fear, dear listener, you know how quietly the soul waits, how stubbornly hope survives. Now if Acrisius thought bronze walls could stop the weaving of fate, he had not accounted for the gods. Zeus, lord of Olympus, turned his ever-curious gaze upon Argos. Perhaps he saw Danae's sorrow from afar. Perhaps he heard her voice carried upward in prayer, soft as incense. Or perhaps, as is often the case with Zeus, he simply felt desire stir in his heart, and the constraints of loyalty or morality fluttered away like startled birds. And here, gentle dreamer, allow a small aside. In the retellings of the ancients, Zeus is rarely the model husband. His faithfulness to Hera could be described at best as conceptual. Vase paintings and temple friezes across Greece tell stories of his many disguises: a swan, a bull, a shower of light. Each form allowed him to bypass the obstacles of mortal circumstance. And here, as he looked upon Danae in her prison of bronze, he chose something altogether stranger. He became a shower of golden rain. But that, dear listener, belongs to the next part of our tale. For now, let us leave Danae sitting in her chamber, unaware of the shimmering descent that soon will change the course of her life, her father's fate, and the story of heroes yet unborn. So rest and breathe with me. The prophecy has been spoken, the prison is sealed, and the stars over Argos shine, on patient as ever. The tale, like a lullaby, has only just begun. The bronze chamber glowed faintly in the half-light, dear listener, as though it had swallowed the sun and was slowly digesting its rays. Within it sat Danae, daughter of Argos, cloaked in silence. Her hair shimmered like burnished copper under the dim beams that leaked through slits in the metal. She was not alone in the world, yet she was treated as though she had already passed into some other realm, walled away from laughter, from human voices, from the ordinary pulse of life. Her father's fear had become her prison, his dread more tangible than the bronze plates that hemmed her in. Imagine her footsteps echoing softly as she paced the chamber. The sound must have been strange footfalls, bouncing off metal instead of stone, like the faint ringing of a muted bell. She might pause by the narrow opening high above, craning her neck to glimpse a triangle of sky. A gull's cry now and then, the pale blur of clouds, but always the bars of light slipped away again, leaving her adrift in a world of copper walls and unyielding silence. This was no casual cruelty. Acrisius believed he was acting to protect his throne, his life, and perhaps even his city. Greek kings, you see, lived always with an eye toward the fragility of power. Their reigns were secure only so long as the gods were kind and the people obedient. A whisper of prophecy could turn into an avalanche of unrest. If the court murmured that Danae's child would kill the king, how quickly might rivals sharpen their daggers? Better, Acrisius thought, to seal away the problem entirely. Yet, dear dreamer, the more carefully a man builds his cage, the more brightly the gods seem to shine their light upon it. Fate is mischievous that way. And so came the moment of wonder. One evening, or perhaps it was midday, depending on which poet you trust, Danae looked up as the air itself seemed to glow. It was not a torch, nor lightning, nor fire. It was a glittering cascade, soft as rain, but golden as a harvest field. The bronze ceiling did not open, but somehow the light passed through, shimmering and spilling across her chamber, in threads of molten brightness. Zeus had arrived, not with the thunder of storms, nor with the pomp of a king, but as a shower of golden rain. The ancients often painted this moment with reverence and mystery. On vases, you see Danae lifting her arms, as though bathing in a divine waterfall. In later poetry, the golden rain is a metaphor for power descending into fragility, or even for the mingling of wealth and desire. But for Danae herself, alone in her chamber, it must have been bewildering. Imagine trying to understand it. The gleam soaking into her skin, the warmth pressing close, the presence of a god filling every corner of her tiny cell. Zeus, Lord of Olympus, was rarely subtle in his affections. His gaze wandered far beyond his wife Hera, and his disguises, swans, bull's golden mist, were infamous in the songs of bards. Perhaps, gentle listener, we may smile wryly at his creativity. Fidelity, in Zeus's vocabulary, was more a poetic idea than a lived reality. And yet, for all the strangeness of his approach, he was drawn to Danae, not merely for beauty, but for the poignancy of her plight. She trapped unjustly by fear. He a god who could slip through any barrier. The symmetry must have appealed to him like a riddle only he could solve. And thus Danae conceived. The myths tell us she bore the god's presence with awe and trembling, and soon her body carried the stirrings of life, a child growing quietly in her hidden womb, while the bronze walls stood as mute witnesses. You can almost picture her hands resting protectively over her belly, a secret warmth shared only with the flicker of sunlight slipping through the cracks. But secrets cannot remain hidden forever. Acrisius, ever suspicious, eventually discovered that his careful plans had unraveled. Whether by the swelling of Danae's form or the whispers of attendants, the truth reached him. His daughter, the one he had sealed away, was with child. His fury must have been volcanic. Who had dared breach his chamber of bronze? Who had touched his daughter under lock and key? Yet the story only deepened his dread. For it was not some mortal suitor, not some guard or thief. It was Zeus himself. Acrisius may have raged, may have thrown his fists to the heavens, but he knew one thing with certainty: no mortal punishment could touch the king of gods. To rail against Zeus was to court ruin, and so Acrisius's terror grew ever sharper. The oracle's words echoed in his ears: "Your daughter's son will kill you." Here we may pause, dear listener, and let the rhythm of fate settle like a heartbeat. For in this moment, we see again that strange Greek irony: a king trying to build safety finds himself further trapped by prophecy. He had locked away his daughter to prevent her child, and now she bore not just any child, but a child of Olympus. A hero in the making, a force beyond mortal reckoning. What could Acrisius do? He was bound by fear, and his choices would soon ripple outward into the vastness of myth. Danae, meanwhile, rested her hand on her stomach, feeling the faint stirring of the child who would be called Perseus. Bronze walls no longer felt like a tomb, but like the shell of an egg waiting to crack open. And so, gentle dreamer, let us leave Danae in that quiet chamber of glowing bronze golden light, still shimmering in memory, the seed of destiny planted. Outside, Acrisius paced his halls, shadows dancing on the marble as the chill of prophecy coiled tighter around his heart. Inside, Danae whispered lullabies to a son not yet born, unaware that his journey would carry him far beyond her prison and into the trembling heart of legend. Close your eyes for now, if you wish, and picture it: bronze walls glowing golden rain, dissolving into silence, a mother cradling hope in the midst of fear. For the tale, like the child, is only just beginning to grow. The bronze chamber no longer seemed quite the same, dear listener. Where once it had been a hollow cage, echoing with Danae's solitude, Now it was filled with the slow, steady rhythm of life. She could feel it first as a whisper beneath her heart, then as the gentle tide of a child growing within her. A secret heartbeat, as though the gods themselves had tucked a star into her womb. Imagine her there, sitting cross-legged on the polished floor, fingers resting lightly against her stomach, humming little tunes that had no name. Perhaps she sang of the sea she once glimpsed beyond the palace walls, or of the olive groves she used to walk through as a girl. The chamber, once suffocating, now seemed to echo with lullabies, the bronze walls glowing warmer in the light of her new hope. But outside her hidden world, Acrisius paced his palace like a man haunted. The news that Danae carried a child had spread through the halls, whispered by servants who dared not speak too loudly. Acrisius interrogated them all, his voice sharp, his eyes bloodshot. "Who has entered her chamber?" he demanded. "Who has defiled my daughter's seclusion?" The answer only deepened his dread. No mortal man at all. It was Zeus. Now, dear dreamer, pause with me and imagine the king's heart. To be told that one's carefully wrought defenses had been outwitted not by a human, but by the Lord of the Skies himself. Acrisius must have felt like a spider who had spun a perfect web, only to find it shimmering uselessly against the thunder of a storm. He clenched his fists, but what could he do? To rage against Zeus was folly. To kill Danae and the unborn child would bring divine punishment upon his head. And yet the prophecy loomed. How does a man wrestle with doom? Some accept it, some deny it. Acrisius sought to sidestep it. When the child was born, Danae named him Perseus. She cradled him in her arms, whispering soft words, her voice like a stream flowing over stones. He was no ordinary infant, and perhaps even then, in the glimmer of his eyes, there was the trace of Olympus. A strong child, restless with a spark that seemed too bright for the confines of bronze walls. But Acrisius, watching from the shadows, did not see wonder. He saw a dagger pointed at his own heart. His grandson, the instrument of his death, was alive and cooing in Danae's embrace. Here, gentle listener, the story gathers tension like a bowstring. Acrisius could not bring himself to spill his daughter's blood. The Greeks believed that the slaying of kin was the gravest of crimes, staining one's soul with a miasma that drew vengeance from both mortals and gods. Even kings were not immune. So instead, Acrisius conceived another plan, one he thought might appease his conscience while still ridding him of danger. He ordered a chest to be built. Not a small box, but a great wooden coffer sealed tight. Into this chest, Danae and her infant were placed. Imagine the fear in her heart as she clutched her child, the grain of the wood pressing against her back, the scent of pine and tar filling her nostrils. Soldiers carried the chest to the shore, where the waves lapped innocently at the sand. The sea was dark, heavy with foam. Acrisius stood there, cloak whipping in the wind, his face carved with both grief and grim resolve. He did not look his daughter in the eye. He gave the order, and the chest was pushed into the waves. And so, Danae and little Perseus were cast upon the mercy of the sea. Here we may pause, gentle dreamer, for this image is one of the oldest and most haunting in myth. A mother and child adrift upon the waters, sealed in a wooden cradle that might just as easily be a coffin. The Greeks knew the sea as both giver and taker of life. Fishermen prayed to it for food. Sailors feared it for its tempests. Poets sang of it as a restless god. To entrust a life to the sea was to roll dice in the hands of Poseidon himself. Inside the chest, Danae pressed her lips to her child's forehead, whispering prayers. Perhaps she prayed to Zeus, father of her son, to guide them. Perhaps to Poseidon, master of waves, to spare them. Or perhaps, in her quiet strength, she simply sang to Perseus her voice rising and falling with the sway of the sea. For in such moments, dear listener, a mother's lullaby can be as mighty as any divine shield. The waves carried them away from Argos. Nights fell with stars wheeling above the rocking chest. Days came with sunlight filtering through the narrow cracks. Perseus slept, cried fed, and slept again. Danae's arms ached. Her voice grew hoarse, but she held him always, never letting despair fully claim her. Meanwhile, Perseus returned to his halls, convincing himself he had done what was necessary. No blood on his hands, no crime for the gods to punish. Yet the truth, as we know, dear dreamer, is that fate rides on the very choices we believe will escape it. In time, the waves would carry the chest toward new shores. But for this moment in our tale, let us hold still the image, a mother and child adrift upon the boundless sea, their fragile vessel groaning with every swell, their hopes rising and falling like the tide. The bronze chamber is behind them now, the wide ocean before them. Destiny, patient and watchful, sails beside them in silence. Rest a little with that thought. The waves lap the stars' gleam, and Danae whispers to her son, "The prophecy has not been defeated. It has only begun its long voyage." The wooden chest creaked as it rose and fell upon the swells, dear listener, like a cradle rocked not by gentle hands, but by the great heaving lungs of the sea. Within it, Danae clutched her child, the newborn Perseus, while salt water hissed against the seams and the timbers groaned with every wave. Her hair clung damp against her cheeks, and her whispers to her son mingled with the endless rush of the tide. Imagine the vastness around them. No horizon but water, no companions but gulls wheeling overhead, no sound but the roar and sigh of the surf. The world had narrowed to one fragile vessel and the heartbeat of a child. Perseus, far behind them, believed he had solved his problem washing his hands of guilt and prophecy. Yet here, on the restless plain of Poseidon, the story was only beginning to unfold. Night fell, and with it came the stars. Danae gazed upward through the narrow slits of the chest, catching glimpses of constellations glittering like the embroidery of the gods. She thought of stories her nurse had once told her, how sailors steered by the constellations, how Orion hunted across the sky, how the Pleiades wept eternal tears. Now, these same stars seemed to watch her silent witnesses to her plight. Her arms tightened around Perseus. He stirred and whimpered, and she soothed him with a lullaby, her voice quavering yet steady. If you close your eyes, gentle dreamer, you might hear it too, a mother's murmur, rising above the hiss of the sea, fragile but unbroken like a candle's flame, refusing to bow to the wind. The Greeks knew well the double nature of the sea. Homer called it wine dark, both beautiful and terrifying. To cast someone upon its mercy was to surrender them to the moods of Poseidon. Did he frown that night, stirring the waters into turmoil? Or did he perhaps, out of grudging respect for Zeus's son, allow the waves to cradle the chest gently? We cannot know, for myth leaves these mysteries soft around the edges, like a dream half remembered. Still storms must have come. Clouds heavy as anvils would have rolled across the sky. Rain lashed the wooden lid, and thunder grumbled like a beast in the dark. Danae, trembling, pressed her child close, whispering prayers. She prayed to Zeus, who had fathered him, though perhaps she doubted whether the great Olympian truly listened. She prayed to Poseidon, asking him to calm the waves. She prayed even to the kindly Nereids the sea maidens said to sing beneath the foam. And yet, amid all the fear, there was also a strange kind of peace. For Danae had nothing left to control, nothing left to hold but her son. In that surrender, there was clarity. The chest might sink, the sea might devour them. But until that moment came, she would sing. She would hold him. She would be a mother. Perhaps the gods did take pity, for though the storm may have raged, the chest did not break. Though the waves rose like mountains, the vessel floated onward, like a stubborn cork defying the abyss. Some poets said that golden light clung to the wood, a sign of Zeus's watchfulness. Others imagined dolphins guiding it from below, their sleek backs glinting in the moonlight. The truth, dear listener, lies somewhere between the mythic and the human, the stubborn resilience of a mother and the mysterious kindness of fate. Days passed. The sun beat down, painting Danae's face with weariness, but still she endured. Salt stung her lips, hunger gnawed her belly, yet she refused to despair. For despair would have been another prison, and she had already left one behind. Instead, she watched the horizon eyes searching for land, and at last it came. One morning, as dawn blushed across the waves, Danae glimpsed dark shapes rising against the sky. Cliffs, hills, the outline of an island. The chest drifted closer, pulled by unseen currents, until at last the keel of its wooden belly scraped upon sand. Waves foamed around it, and the cries of gulls grew louder. The island was Seriphos. To Danae, it was salvation. To Perseus, though still an infant, it was the first shore of his long destiny. For now, let us linger with the image of the chest resting upon the sand, the tide gently rocking it, as though reluctant to surrender its burden. Danae, exhausted, clutching her son, breathes in the smell of salt and earth mingled at last. The sea has carried them far, but not destroyed them. And here, dear dreamer, new voices will soon enter the tale. But that, as with all stories, belongs to the next turning of the page. For tonight, let us leave them there, the chest at rest, the mother weary but unbroken, the child cooing softly against her heart. The prophecy still waits like a shadow, stretched across time, but for this moment they are alive, and the island cradles them as gently as the sea once did. So, breathe, gentle listener, as though rocked by waves yourself. The storm has passed, the shore is reached, and the tale glides onward. The island of Seriphos rose from the sea like a green jewel, rugged cliffs, giving way to softer stretches of sand and olive-dotted hills. Here, the chest came to rest, its journey, finished though the story of those it carried had only just begun. Imagine, dear listener, the early morning air crisp with sea spray, laced with the scent of thyme and pine that clung to the island's slopes. Fishermen were already at work, their nets dragging through the shallows, their boats bobbing like gulls tethered to the tide. One such fisherman was Dictys. His name means net, and indeed, he lived his life close to the sea, casting nets by dawn, mending them by dusk. He was no king, no warrior, but a man of simple honesty, with hands calloused from rope and salt, and a heart steady as the tides. As the waves washed the chest onto the sand, Dictys came near, perhaps thinking it no more than driftwood, another offering from the sea. But when he pried it open with his knife, light struck his eyes, not golden treasure, but something rarer still. There, curled within the wooden frame, was Danae, her gown, damp, her hair tangled but still gleaming. In her arms rested Perseus, tiny yet fierce, in his squirming, his cries louder than the gulls overhead. Dictys, startled, stepped back. He had not expected life within such a coffin-shaped vessel. Danae lifted her eyes to him, weary but resolute, and whispered words of plea, though even without words, the sight itself begged mercy. And mercy was what Dictys gave. He reached down his rough hands, gentle as he helped them from the chest. He offered food, water, and the warmth of his small hut. He asked no questions of shame or scandal, only listened as Danae explained what she could, her imprisonment, the prophecy, her father's fear. Dictys shook his head. muttering perhaps that kings too often let fear make them cruel. And so he took them in. But Seriphos was not ruled by Dictys. Over the island reigned his brother, King Polydectes. Polydectes was a man of sharper appetite, a ruler whose gaze lingered too long where it should not, and whose words curled like nets around those he desired. In Danae, he saw not a castaway mother in need of protection, but beauty too rare for a fisherman's household. So while Dictys sheltered Danae and Perseus in his modest home, raising the boy as though King Polydectes watched from his palace, a hunger simmering in his chest, Danae, he decided, should be his. But there was the problem of the boy Perseus, growing tall shoulders, broadening spirit fierce. He was protective of his mother, and already the whispers of his divine parentage gave him a certain aura. To court Danae was to court trouble so long as Perseus stood at her side. Here, gentle dreamer, the myth begins to shift tone. We move from the sorrow of confinement and drifting seas into the tension of schemes and hidden motives. Perseus, though still young, began to train his body in the ways of men. He learned to throw the discus, to wrestle, to wield a simple spear. On Seriphos, he found the strength of his limbs, the quickness of his wit. Danae, watching him grow, must have felt both pride and anxiety, for in each inch he gained, she saw the shadow of the prophecy still waiting. Polydectes, however, bided his time. Kings often do. He did not seize Danae outright, not while Perseus could resist him. Instead, he smiled, with false kindness, spoke words of hospitality, and waited for the moment when cunning could succeed where force might fail. The Greeks loved to tell stories where cleverness, not brute strength, guided the wheel of fate. And Polydectes, for all his greed, was clever enough to hide it behind a king's smile. Now, let us rest in this scene, dear listener. Picture Danae, safe at last from the sea, sitting by Dictys' hearth as the fire crackled. Perseus, a boy, with eyes bright as polished bronze, wrestled with other children on the shore, his laughter echoing across the waves. Dictys mended his nets nearby, humming a fisherman's tune. For a little while life seemed ordinary, gentle, free of omens. But stories like these rarely allow peace to last. Polydectes' desire would not sleep forever. Already, he was weaving plans, whispering to his court-setting snares of words and obligations. Soon, he would demand of Perseus an impossible task, one meant to rid him of the boy and clear the way to Danae. But that dear dreamer belongs to the next turn of our tale. For tonight, let us pause on the shore of Seriphos. The chest has opened, life has been spared, and for the first time since her confinement, Danae breathes freely under the open sky. The gulls wheel overhead, the waves murmur against the sand, and the child of prophecy grows in the sun. So close your eyes with her if you will, and feel the comfort of earth beneath you after so long at sea. For though shadows gather, the present moment glows warm and bright. The seasons turn gently on Seriphos, dear listener, and the boy Perseus grew like a sapling under the Mediterranean sun. His limbs lengthened, his voice deepened, and the vigor of youth filled him with restless energy. He swam in the clear waters, clambered over rocky cliffs, and trained with the spear and discus until his muscles hardened like carved marble. Danae, watching from the shade of olive trees, saw in him both the glow of her divine lover and the strength of mortal endurance. She whispered prayers for his safety, though she knew in her heart that destiny would never leave him untouched. Dictys, the fisherman who had saved them, treated Perseus as a son. He taught him to weave nets, to read the moods of the sea, and to respect its power. Perseus, though born of Zeus, grew with the humility of a fisherman's household, learning that survival came not from arrogance, but from skill and patience. Perhaps this is why later poets said, He was beloved of the gods. He carried both divine fire and mortal grounding in his soul. But not all eyes on the island were so kind. King Polydectes, brother of Dictys and ruler of Seriphos, had long harbored a hungry gaze for Danae. The more she avoided his attentions, the more his desire sharpened like a sword honed to a dangerous edge. Perseus stood between them, tall and protective, a young lion guarding its mother. And so, Polydectes devised a scheme subtle enough to seem like custom, yet cruel enough to rid him of the obstacle. He announced a great feast, declaring that he intended to marry. Not Danae. Oh no, at least not openly. Instead, he proclaimed that his bride would be Hippodamia, a distant princess known more in name than in presence. To celebrate, he invited every man of Seriphos to bring him a gift suitable for a wedding. Horses' fine cloth goblets of silver, such were the offerings he demanded. Now Perseus was young, proud, and not wealthy. How could the son of an exiled princess and a fisherman bring a gift equal to kings? When Polydectes pressed him before the assembly, Perseus spoke with boldness, as young men often do when their pride is pricked. "Name your gift, my king," he said, "and I will bring it to you. Even if it is the head of Medusa herself." Ah, gentle dreamer, do you hear the hush that must have fallen across the hall? A boast, yes, but one Polydectes seized upon with the swiftness of a hawk. For Medusa was no ordinary quarry. She was one of the Gorgon sisters, whose hair writhed with snakes, and whose gaze turned men to stone. Few dared even speak her name without shuddering. Yet here was Perseus, the proud youth, promising her head as though it were no more than a stag in the forest. Polydectes smiled a serpent's smile. "Then so be it," he declared, voice smooth, with false courtesy. "If that is your vow, Perseus, bring me the head of Medusa as your wedding gift. All of Seriphos shall honor you if you succeed." Danae's heart must have clenched like a fist. She knew the cruelty behind the king's words. This was no noble request. It was a death sentence cloaked in ceremony. To face Medusa was to court certain doom. Many warriors older and more seasoned than Perseus had turned to stone before her glare. That night, Danae wept in the shadows, cradling her son's hands in hers, begging him not to go. But Perseus, young and resolute, refused to bend. He could not show weakness before the court. He could not allow Polydectes to triumph through humiliation. And so, with a mixture of defiance and innocence, he prepared to embark on the impossible. Here we may pause, dear listener, to reflect on the nature of pride and fate. How often do our bold words become snares around our ankles? Perseus might have lived quietly fishing with Dictys guarding his mother, but the boast had left his lips, and Polydectes' cunning had bound it into obligation. In Greek, thought words themselves carried power. To speak was to bind oneself, just as much as any oath sworn before the gods. And yet sometimes the rashness of youth becomes the spark of legend. For even as Perseus despaired of how he might succeed, the gods stirred. Athena, goddess of wisdom and warcraft, admired boldness when tempered with wit. Hermes, fleet messenger and trickster, loved a challenge. And both had their reasons to see Medusa fall. Her monstrous gaze was a stain upon the world, her lair a nightmare that needed cleansing. Who better than a son of Zeus, half mortal and half divine, to take on the task? So it was that Perseus, though trapped by the malice of a king, would soon find himself armed not only with mortal courage, but with divine aid. And the tale, dear dreamer, turns here from island intrigue to heroic quest, the kind of story sung by bards, painted on vases, and whispered beside firelight for centuries. But for now, let us leave Perseus on the shore of Seriphos, the waves breaking at his feet, his mother's tears glistening on his hands, the weight of an impossible task pressing upon his shoulders. Above the stars glimmered like silent witnesses. Fate had spoken, and Perseus had answered. Rest with that image, gentle listener. The boy who drifted to this island in a wooden chest now sets forth to face a terror older than kings, older than prophecies. His journey has only just begun. The shore of Seriphos shimmered with dawn light, dear listener, when Perseus set out upon his quest. His sandals pressed into the wet sand, leaving prints that the tide quickly erased, as though the sea itself wished to keep his path secret. Danae watched from behind her heart, a tangle of love and dread, while Dictys laid a hand upon her shoulder in silent comfort. For no mother can easily release her child into the jaws of fate, and no friend can offer words strong enough to counter the chill of such a journey. Perseus, for all his bold boasting, did not yet know how he could hope to face Medusa. He had no map, no weapon worthy of the task, and no guidance beyond the cruel smile of Polydectes. But the gods, ever watchful, were already moving their pieces upon the board. It was Athena who came first. She appeared not in blinding radiance, but in a cool gleam of armor, as though the morning mist itself had shaped into a goddess. Her gray eyes, keen and unwavering, studied the youth. Perseus, she said, her voice, like bronze, striking bronze, your courage has drawn the notice of Olympus. But courage without wisdom is as brittle as clay. You will need aid, and I will see that you have it. From her hands, she offered a shield polished to a mirror's perfection. Its surface gleamed so brightly that the waves themselves seemed to lean closer, admiring their reflection. Look not upon Medusa directly. Athena instructed, for her gaze will turn you to stone. Instead, let this shield be your guide. See her only in reflection, and her power shall falter. Perseus bowed low, accepting the shield with reverence. He felt its weight solid and reassuring, and the faint echo of divine craftsmanship thrummed in his palms. Then came Hermes, ever the wanderer, light of foot and quick of tongue. He appeared with a laugh that rippled like wind through reeds, his winged sandals skimming the ground. Well, cousin, he greeted, for indeed Perseus shared his father's blood. You've found yourself in a fine tangle. A monster for a wedding gift. That Polydectes has a sly sense of humor. In Hermes' hands gleamed a blade curved and sharp as moonlight on water. Take this, he said. It is not size, but sharpness that matters in this fight. A single stroke will do if you are swift enough. He winked, and his grin carried both mischief and reassurance. But even with shield and sword, Perseus still faced a problem where to find Medusa. The Gorgon's lair was no place marked on mortal maps. It lay beyond the edges of the known world, somewhere at the dark reaches of ocean and sand, where dreams curdle into nightmares. For this, the gods told him, he must seek the Graea ancient sisters, who shared but a single eye and a single tooth between them. Only they knew the path to Medusa's dwelling. Athena and Hermes, wise enough to see the boy's uncertainty, did not leave him alone. They guided him onward, Hermes gliding ahead with winged feet, Athena walking with steps steady as drumbeats. Perseus felt the strange mix of awe and fear that comes when gods walk beside men. He was half mortal, yes, but in their company he seemed smaller. Still a youth thrust into a story larger than himself. Yet, is that not how legends are always born? Not from those who know the road, but from those who step upon it, blindly guided only by faith, fear, and a hint of reckless pride. They traveled first across islands, where olive groves bent to the wind, then through coasts, where fishermen paused in awe to glimpse the glitter of divine armor. Each night, Perseus would sit by the fire, the shield propped beside him, the sword across his knees. He would polish them slowly, the reflection of flames dancing upon the bronze. Danae's face would rise in his memory, her whispered prayers, a kind of invisible cloak about his shoulders. In moments of quiet, Athena spoke to him not only of battle, but of thought of how courage must be sharpened by strategy, how strength without foresight leads only to ruin. Hermes, by contrast, told him sly tales of thieves outwitted and lovers tricked, reminding Perseus that cunning is often sharper than steel. Between them, the youth began to shape himself into something new, no longer the fisherman's ward, no longer only Danae's boy, but a hero stepping into his own light. Here, gentle dreamer, let us pause. The gifts of the gods gleam before him, the shield of reflection, the sword of swiftness, the promise of guidance. And yet tools alone do not make a hero. It is the heart that must steady the hand, the resolve that must guide the strike. Perseus's journey was still only beginning, and the road to the Graeae stretched out like a ribbon into shadow. So let us leave him here, on the path between mortal and divine shield, strapped to his arm sword. At his belt, the night sky spread above him like a scroll written with stars. The gods walk beside him, the sea whispers on distant shores, and destiny waits patiently like a lion crouched just beyond the firelight. Close your eyes now, gentle listener. The gifts have been given, the quest has taken shape, and the tale, like the soft surf of the Aegean, moves steadily forward. The path to the Graeae wound into lands half remembered by men, dear listener, rocky coasts, where the wind smelled of salt and iron barren hills, where no shepherd dared linger, and caverns that echoed with the sound of waves gnawing at stone. Perseus, with Athena's shield slung over his back and Hermes' blade at his side, pressed forward, the gods ever near, though sometimes unseen. He knew that to reach Medusa, he must first find her sisters, ancient withered beings, who held secrets older than the mountains themselves. The Graeae were strange creatures, even by the standards of Greek myth. 3 sisters, gray-haired from birth, they shared one eye and one tooth among them. Imagine, gentle dreamer, how odd their existence must have been. One sister, peering, while the other 2 stumbled in darkness, then passing the eye carefully from hand to hand like a borrowed lantern. Their tooth, too, was a treasure set into the mouth of whichever sister wished to speak clearly. The ancients often told this part of the myth with a shiver of amusement, for it carried the eerie humor of nightmare logic. Athena, ever pragmatic, warned Perseus of their nature. They will not give you what you need willingly. They love their secrets, hoard them as miserly as kings hoard gold. You must be cunning. Hermes, of course, added with a grin. And trickery happens to run in the family cousin. Best to lean into it. Perseus traveled to the dark place where the sisters dwelt, a cave whose mouth yawned like the jaws of some sleeping beast. The air inside was cool and damp, carrying the smell of moss and age. He heard them before he saw them, voices thin and scratchy bickering as they fumbled with their shared eye. "Give it to me," sister croaked one. "You had it all morning," rasped another. "And what use is it to you, toothless, as you are snapped the third?" Their laughter was brittle, like stones clinking in a jar. Creeping closer, Perseus glimpsed them in the gloom. 3 frail figures hunched together, faces creased like old parchment hands gnarled as roots. One sister held the single eye squinting into the dark, while another reached blindly for it. It was then that Perseus acted with the swiftness Hermes had counseled. As the eye passed between claw-like fingers, he darted forward, snatching it from the air. The sisters shrieked as one, their bony hands grasping at emptiness, their heads twisting blindly. "Who dares," they wailed, "who steals the eye of the Graeae?" Perseus' heart, steady, though his pulse raced, spoke firmly. "It is I, Perseus, son of Danae, grandson of Argos, and child of Zeus. I seek the lair of Medusa, and you will tell me where it lies." The sisters clawed the air, wailing in fury and fear. Without the eye, they were helpless, locked in their own blindness. Perseus held it high, feeling its eerie weight. It was no ordinary eye, but a strange glimmering orb, slick and alive, as though it pulsed faintly with its own heartbeat. "We will not tell," screeched one sister. "Then you will wander blind forever," Perseus replied. His voice was calm, though within he marveled at his own daring. "Guide me, and the eye will be returned. Refuse, and I leave you to stumble in darkness, forever, groping, never seeing." A silence fell, broken only by their ragged breathing. Then one sister, her voice softer, hissed, "Very well, child of Zeus. The Gorgons dwell at the edge of the world, beyond the rivers where no sun shines. To reach them, you must travel west, where the ocean kisses the desert. But you cannot face them with shield and sword alone. You will need the helm of invisibility, the winged sandals, and the pouch to carry what you take. These treasures belong to the nymphs, and only we can guide you there." Perseus tightened his grip. "Then guide me." And so, trembling and muttering, they gave him the directions he sought, telling of a hidden path where the nymphs kept their treasures. Hermes leaned close and whispered encouragement, Athena's gaze never leaving the trembling sisters. Once their knowledge was given, Perseus, true to his word, returned the eye, though not before allowing himself the faintest smile at their pitiful scramble to grasp it once more. Here, gentle dreamer, let us linger on this image, the three ancient sisters, huddled together in their cave, clutching their borrowed sight, muttering curses into the dark. And Perseus, stepping out into the daylight, carrying not only shield and sword, but knowledge, which is often the sharpest weapon of all. The Greeks loved this tale, for it shows that strength alone is not the path to victory. Wit, courage, and a touch of trickery, these were the tools by which mortals might dance with fate. Perseus had begun to learn this truth. He was no longer merely a boy driven by pride. He was a hero gathering the instruments of his destiny. The road ahead, however, grew darker still. Medusa waited at the edge of the world, her sisters beside her, her gaze as deadly as ever. But Perseus now carried the guidance of the gods, the cunning of Hermes, the wisdom of Athena, and the secrets of the Graeae. So rest with that thought, gentle listener. The cave of the sisters fades behind us, the echo of their bickering still clinging to the air, while Perseus walks onward toward the realm where nightmares sleep. The air grew colder as Perseus ventured further west, dear listener, toward the realm where the Gorgons lay. The world itself seemed to thin, as though he walked not on ordinary earth, but on the very hem of reality. The sea turned harsher waves, clawing at black rocks, and the land grew barren, stripped of olive groves and shepherd paths. Here the sun dimmed before its time, the sky streaked with violet shadows, and the cries of seabirds gave way to eerie silence. It was as though even nature held its breath, wary of the terror that lived ahead. Guided by the Gray's directions, Perseus reached the dwelling of the nymphs, those secretive beings who held treasures no mortal might hope to claim by force. He approached respectfully, his voice steady, though his heart raced, and told them of his quest. The nymphs, mysterious and luminous as moonlit springs, agreed to aid him, for they too despised the horror that Medusa had become, once a maiden of beauty, now a scourge upon the earth. From their hands, Perseus received 3 gifts. First, the winged sandals light as air, which would carry him swiftly across sky and sea. Second, the kibisis, a pouch woven with magic in which to safely contain Medusa's head without gazing upon it. Third, the helm of Hades, black and glimmering, which cloaked its wearer in invisibility, allowing him to pass unseen even by monsters. Armed with these, and with the mirrored shield of Athena and Hermes' gleaming blade, Perseus became not just a youth on a reckless errand, but a hero fully outfitted by heaven and earth. He thanked the nymphs, bowed to their grace, and felt the sandals lift him from the ground wings, beating softly, carrying him toward the final threshold. And there at last, he found them, the Gorgons. They lay sleeping in a hollow by the sea, where cliffs plunged like broken teeth into foaming waves. The air stank faintly of iron, and salt mingled with the heavy musk of serpents. Even from a distance, Perseus could hear the hiss and slither of their hair snakes twisting and tasting the air with forked tongues, even in dreams. Medusa and her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, were a fearsome sight. Their faces, once perhaps lovely, had hardened into grotesque masks. Their tusks jutted like a boar's, their skin scaled, their wings spread across the stone like ragged sails. Around them lay the remnants of their victims' figures, frozen in stone men and beasts alike mouths, open in eternal cries, arms raised in useless defense. It was a garden of statues, grim and silent, each one a warning to those who dared draw near. Perseus's breath caught, but Athena's voice seemed to whisper in his ear, "Remember the shield. Look not upon her directly." So he lifted the polished bronze and angled it before him, letting the reflection guide his steps. In its mirrored face, he saw the nightmare world reverse the cliffs, looming upside down, the sleeping sisters curled like shadows, and Medusa herself, her hair writhing though her eyes were closed. He moved with the silence of Hermes' counsel, every footstep measured. The winged sandals carried him light as a feather, the helm of Hades veiling him in invisibility, so that even the restless snakes did not stir at his approach. Closer, closer, until he stood above Medusa herself. In the mirror of the shield, he saw her breath rise and fall, her face slack with sleep, her monstrous features softened only by the illusion of rest. For a heartbeat, perhaps, he thought of the tales that claimed she had once been a maiden, wronged, cursed by Athena in jealousy or anger. But pity was a luxury he could not afford. The task was clear. Either she died, or he joined the frozen ranks of her stone garden. With a prayer whispered under his breath, Perseus raised the curved sword. One swift stroke, Hermes had said. Do not falter. The blade flashed, slicing through the night, and in an instant, the deed was done. Medusa's head tumbled from her body, her serpents shrieking, writhing in death throes. From the stump of her neck sprang wonders and horrors. Pegasus, the winged horse, leapt into the air, beating its mighty wings, while Chrysaor, a warrior born full-grown, strode forth in gleaming armor. Such was the strange fertility of myth that even in death, monsters gave birth to marvels. Perseus, steady though his heart thundered, caught the head by its hair of snakes and dropped it swiftly into the cabesus. The pouch sealed with a shimmer muffling the deadly gaze within. Around him, the sisters Stheno and Euryale stirred their cries, piercing the night wings, beating in fury as they sought the thief who had slain their kin. But the helm of Hades cloaked Perseus from their eyes. They slashed at empty air, their claws striking stone, their wails shaking the cliffs. Invisible Perseus slipped away sandals, carrying him high into the sky. Below, the enraged Gorgons raged helplessly, their screams echoing across the sea, while the boy who had dared the impossible bore their sister's head safely hidden. Here, gentle dreamer, let us pause. The deed is done. The monster has fallen. And yet, as often in these tales, the slaying is not the end, but only the pivot. For every head severed, every victory claimed sets in motion ripples that stretch across kingdoms and lifetimes. Perseus, son of Danae, has claimed his place among heroes, but his journey home is still ahead, and destiny still waits. Rest for a moment in the hush after the strike. The sea murmurs, the snakes hiss faintly from within the pouch, and the stars glimmer like watching eyes. The boy, who once drifted helplessly in a wooden chest, now soars on winged sandals, carrying death and wonder in equal measure. High above the restless sea, Perseus flew, dear listener, the winged sandals beating against the night. In one hand, he clutched the pouch, the kibisus, where Medusa's head lay, hidden its serpents still hissing faintly, the air around it heavy with a strange shivering power. In his other hand, he gripped the curved blade Hermes had lent him, still damp with the ichor of the slain. The air was cold and sharp against his face, but in his heart there burned the glow of triumph. He had done what no mortal dared dream. Yet even in triumph, the world of myth has a way of weaving marvels into aftermath. For from Medusa's blood, spilled upon the earth, sprang Pegasus, the horse of purest white wings, unfolding with the splendor of dawn. Its mane shimmered like spun silver, and when it leapt into the air, its hooves seemed to strike sparks against the sky. Alongside Pegasus came Chrysaor, the warrior child, golden and fierce, who strode away into legends of his own. Thus, even in death, Medusa birthed wonders, as though reminding all who beheld her tale that endings are but doorways to new beginnings. Perseus, hovering above the cliffs, watched Pegasus soar. The horse turned its great dark eyes toward him, then swept upward wings, slicing through the stars free and unclaimed. Later poets would imagine Perseus riding the winged steed. But in this moment, Pegasus belonged only to the wind, a symbol of freedom unchained. Below, the cries of Stheno and Euryale shook the earth. The sisters raged, their voices shrill with grief, their claws raking stone into shards. They beat their wings, scouring the skies, but the helm of Hades kept Perseus unseen. The air churned with their fury, yet their claws grasped only shadows. Their sorrow was a storm, but he was beyond its reach. And so he flew onward, high and far, the world beneath him, shifting with every beat of the sandals. He crossed desolate coasts, where rocks jutted like the spines of dragons, and rivers that gleamed under moonlight like liquid silver. He drifted over villages where shepherds huddled by fires, never knowing that above them soared a boy carrying the head of a Gorgon. In the shield, strapped at his back, he caught fleeting glimpses, his own face pale with resolve. The night bending around him. The strange calm of a youth who had passed through terror and lived. At times he thought of Danae, his mother waiting on Seriphos, how her prayers must have circled him like unseen wings. He imagined her face when she saw him return, not a boy with empty hands, but a hero bearing the proof of his promise. And yet within him there lingered unease, for a hero's prize is rarely only his own. Kings and tyrants reach eagerly for the trophies others win, and Polydectes, waiting like a spider in his hall, would be no exception. Still, the journey held more trials before he could return. For fate, dear listener, loves detours. And so, as Perseus crossed the skies, the pouch at his side humming faintly with its dangerous burden, the world began to place new stories in his path. Consider this gentle dreamer. To carry a weapon, such as Medusa's head, is to carry not merely death, but the possibility of miracles and disasters alike. It was no longer only an object. It was a force, a silent companion, whose power radiated outward. Even hidden in the pouch, its presence weighed on him, making the very air seem to shimmer. The gods themselves must have watched closely, for such power in mortal hands was a delicate matter indeed. And yet for now, Perseus flew in quiet triumph. Pegasus wheeled above the clouds free, as thought itself, while he steered his course toward the lands where further adventures awaited. The head of Medusa rested at his side, still and silent, yet filled with unspent power. The hero's heart beat steady his breath, misting in the cold night air as the world opened before him like an unrolled scroll of fate. So let us pause here, gentle dreamer, in the stillness between triumph and the next storm. Imagine the sky, spread wide stars like spilled salt, cross velvet, the sea glimmering below, as though holding its own constellations. A youth hovers between earth and heaven, carrying both doom and salvation in a single pouch. His sandals whisper against the air, his shield gleams faintly in moonlight, and destiny stretches forward like a path of fireflies leading into the unknown. Close your eyes and rest a moment in that vision. The hero aloft, the monster slain, the sisters wailing far below, and Pegasus wheeling free across the firmament. The story flows onward, but tonight we hover in this calm, the breath held before the next descent. Perseus's sandals carried him swiftly across the air, dear listener, until at last the familiar outline of Seriphos rose on the horizon. The island's cliffs rugged, yet home gleamed faintly in the morning light. His heart beat faster, not with the thrill of battle now, but with the quiet urgency of return. He thought of Danae, of the years she had endured Polydectes' unwelcome attentions, of her steadfast patience beneath the gaze of a king who desired what was not his. Perseus's journey had not been for glory alone. It had been in its marrow for her. Yet he did not stride first into the palace. No, he sought his mother in Dictys's humble dwelling, the fisherman's hut by the shore. Picture Danae there, weaving by the hearth, her eyes lifting in astonishment as her son appeared taller, sterner, yet still carrying the trace of the boy she had once held in her arms. How her breath must have caught when she saw the glint of Athena's shield, the curve of Hermes' blade, the pouch at his side that seemed to hum with hidden power. She embraced him fiercely, and in her embrace he found again the warmth that no god's gift could match. But joy was soon tempered by the shadow of Polydectes. The king had not abandoned his schemes in Perseus's absence. Believing the boy surely dead, he had grown bolder, pressing Danae with words and threats. When she refused him, he turned cruel, as those denied often do, surrounding himself with flatterers and sycophants, and sneering at the fisherman who had dared shelter a queen. Polydectes' court had become a nest of arrogance, its laughter sharp and hollow, its banquets dripping with wine and vanity. And so Perseus walked into that hall. Imagine it, the torches flaring along the stone walls, the smell of roasted meat heavy in the air, the scrape of lyres filling the chamber. Courtiers lounged on couches, their goblets lifted, their eyes narrowing as the young man entered. Polydectes himself sat upon his throne draped in silks, his smile slow and sly. He leaned forward, voice smooth with mockery. So Perseus, you return. Have you brought me the gift you promised, or are you come only to spin tales of failure? A hush fell, all eyes fixed upon the youth, Perseus steady as the sea before a storm stepped forward. I have brought you the gift, he said simply, and I will show it to you as you so desired. With that, he reached for the pouch. Now, gentle dreamer, let us pause. The Greeks loved this moment, so theatrical, so sharp in its reversal. Here was the king, smug in his belief that the boy had perished, confronted not with defeat, but with the very power he had hoped would destroy his rival. Fate, like a playwright, had arranged its scene with perfect timing. Perseus drew forth Medusa's head. Even in death, her face was terrible, her hair of serpents twisting her eyes, burning with a power that pierced veil and shadow. And though she was severed, her gaze retained its curse. Polydectes' smile froze. His sneer stiffened. His eyes widened, then glazed, then hardened into stone. The courtiers cried out, some raising hands to shield themselves. Others frozen in mid-gesture, their laughter cut short, their goblets spilling wine that turned to crimson streaks across marble floors. One by one, they stiffened their flesh, paling into gray, their forms locked forever in the poses of their vanity. The hall, moments before so full of noise, fell silent, save for the faint hiss of serpents from the head Perseus held aloft. When at last he returned it to the pouch, The chamber was filled not with men, but with statues. Polydectes upon his throne, his courtiers sprawled in eternal mockery, the scene of arrogance preserved as a cautionary tale. And so, justice was done. Not by sword, nor by decree, but by the very monster the king had demanded as tribute. Danae was free. Dictys, the humble fisherman, would soon be raised as ruler of the island, for the people loved his kindness far more than they had ever feared Polydectes' scorn. Perseus, standing amid the silent figures, must have felt the weight of what he carried. Medusa's head was not only a weapon of vengeance, but also a reminder power is never merely a tool. It is a burden, one that shapes the hands which wield it. And yet in that moment, he did not think of philosophy. He thought only of his mother's safety, her smile shining like dawn after storm. The boy, who had been set adrift in a chest, had returned a man, his promise kept, his love unbroken. So let us pause here, gentle dreamer, in this quiet aftermath. The torches flicker against stone faces, the hush of victory settles like a blanket, and Perseus breathes deeply, the tension of years slipping away. Danae is free. The tyrant is gone. And though fate still coils unseen for this moment, the island of Seriphos rests easy. Close your eyes now, as though you too sit in that hall, turned to stone, the echoes fading into silence. The storm has passed, though the horizon still hides the next turning of the tale. After the silence of Polydectes' hall, dear listener, Perseus longed to turn his sandals toward home and let the sea winds carry him into peace. But myths, as you know, rarely allow for such straight paths. The gods had armed him, not for one deed alone, but for many ripples in the stream of fate. And so, his journey bent again toward wonder, toward peril, and toward love. For as Perseus flew above the restless waters, the horizon opened to reveal a coastline unlike any he had seen before. The air was heavy with salt and sorrow. A procession of people wound along the shore, their robes torn in grief, their voices carrying wails that even the gulls seemed to echo. He drifted lower, unseen beneath the helm of Hades, and his eyes fell upon a sight both beautiful and terrible. Chained to the jagged rocks at the edge of the surf was a maiden. Her arms stretched upward, wrists bound with iron, her white garments torn by wind and spray. Her hair dark as midnight whipped across her face, but her posture held dignity even in despair. This was Andromeda, daughter of Cepheus and Cassiopeia, rulers of Ethiopia. She had been offered as sacrifice to a monster of the sea sent by Poseidon himself. Why such a cruel punishment? Ah, the Greeks knew well the dangers of pride. Cassiopeia, Andromeda's mother, had once boasted that her daughter's beauty outshone even the Nereids, the sea nymphs beloved of Poseidon. Vanity, though it glitters like gold, often draws storms in myth. The insult enraged the god of the deep, and so he sent forth a creature vast and terrible, a sea dragon whose scales gleamed with salt and whose roar churned the waves. To appease him, the oracle declared, Andromeda must be given to the beast. Picture the scene, gentle dreamer. The surf, foaming white against the rocks, the people gathered on the shore, in mourning the princess bound, as in offering, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the monster would come. The very air seemed to shudder with dread. And then Perseus descended. Removing the helm, he appeared like a star, falling to earth sandals, gleaming shield, shining the pouch at his side, whispering with hidden menace. To the astonished crowd he spoke. Why is this maiden chained, and what crime has brought such punishment upon her Cepheus? The father stepped forward, his crown askew, his face hollow with grief. It is no crime of hers, but of her mother's pride. Poseidon demands she be given to the monster, or else our land shall drown beneath his wrath. Perseus's gaze lingered on Andromeda. Perhaps he saw in her the same resilience he had known in Danae, a strength wrapped in beauty, a soul enduring chains with quiet fire. Perhaps he simply felt the stir of destiny, that strange pull by which myths weave love into terror. He lifted his voice and declared, "If I slay this beast, will you grant me her hand in marriage?" The king, desperate and trembling, swore it by the gods, and so Perseus turned to face the sea. The waters heaved. A roar split the air, deep and guttural, shaking the cliffs. The creature rose, scales black as night eyes glowing like embers beneath the waves. Its jaws gaped wide, lined with teeth sharp as spears, and its body coiled in the surf like a mountain come alive. The people cried out, but Perseus stood firm, sandals bearing him aloft, shield gleaming in the sun. He did not fight with sword alone, for he carried a weapon beyond all mortal reckoning. As the monster lunged, waves crashing from its bulk, Perseus reached into the pouch. He drew forth Medusa's head, its serpents writhing, its gaze blazing even in death. The sea dragon froze. Its roar choked into silence. Its coils stiffened, hardened, and in a breath, the beast turned to stone. Its massive body became a reef of jagged rock waves, breaking forever upon its petrified spine. The shore erupted with cries, astonishment, joy, disbelief. Andromeda, her chains falling away, stepped forward into the surf, her eyes wide upon the youth who had saved her. Perseus, still holding the terrible head, quickly returned it to the pouch, then extended his hand. She took it, her fingers trembling, and in that clasp, the threads of their lives entwined. Later poets loved to linger on this moment, the rescue, the promise, the love that sprang as sudden and fierce as the clash of steel. For Perseus, who had lived his life chasing shadows of prophecy and danger, found now a reason to build a future. And for Andromeda, who had been bound as victim, came freedom not only from chains, but into the companionship of one who understood both fear and defiance. So let us rest here, gentle dreamer, in the afterglow of victory. The monster lies frozen in stone waves, bursting against its flanks. The people rejoice along the shore, and Perseus and Andromeda stand together. Their hands join their eyes, speaking promises that words need not. The prophecy still coils unseen, waiting its hour. But for now, there is triumph, and there is love. Close your eyes and drift with them, as though the tide itself were carrying you gently onward. For the tale, like the sea, still has depths to reveal. The wedding of Perseus and Andromeda, dear listener, was not simply a union of two hearts, but a weaving of fates. In the quiet aftermath of the sea dragon's defeat, the people of Ethiopia celebrated with torches blazing along the shore, lyres thrumming, and dancers whirling in circles around the new heroes. Andromeda, once a sacrifice, now walked among them, with her head lifted high, no longer bound by chains, but crowned with garlands of flowers. Perseus by her side carried himself with the calm gravity of one who had faced gods and monsters and lived. Yet as with so many tales, joy was not untouched by shadow. For destiny does not rest, even at the altar, and whispers of fate clung to Perseus still. Though he clasped Andromeda's hand and spoke vows beneath the stars, somewhere in his heart there stirred the echo of the oracle, the grandson of Acrisius shall kill him. That shadow stretched across every smile like a faint storm cloud, drifting above a wedding feast. But let us not hurry, gentle dreamer. Let us stay a moment in the glow of celebration. Imagine the feasts laid upon long tables, roasted lamb, dripping with honey figs, glistening with sweetness, wine poured freely until the cups themselves gleamed red in the torchlight. Poets sang of Perseus's victories, their verses rising like sparks into the night air, while children chased one another, pretending to be winged heroes or stone-faced monsters. Danae, far away on Seriphos, would have wept with joy to see her son, so honored, so loved. Still not all hearts were softened. Phineus, a former suitor of Andromeda, seethed at the sight of her beside Perseus. His pride, wounded by rejection, flared into fury. He burst into the wedding hall, with armed men crying out that Andromeda was his by right, that Perseus had stolen what belonged to him. Swords clashed, shouts rang out, and for a moment the celebration trembled on the brink of bloodshed. But Perseus was no longer a boy fumbling with destiny. Calm as still water, he reached again for the pouch. Before Phineus and his men could strike, Perseus revealed the head of Medusa. In a heartbeat, the clamor froze. The suitor's defiant glare hardened into stone. His soldiers, caught mid-swing, stiffened their weapons, locked forever in marble grips. The hall fell silent, but for the hiss of serpents, and then Perseus gently returned the head to its pouch. The feast continued more cautious now, the stone figures left as a grim reminder of folly. Andromeda stood beside him, through it all, her fingers clutching his hand. She did not shrink from the terror he carried, for she knew it was also his burden. In her eyes, Perseus was not merely the slayer of monsters, but the man who had chosen to see her worth beyond her chains. That, dear listener, is why their love endures, in story, not because of rescue alone, but because they saw in one another the fragile shining thread of humanity. Together, they left Ethiopia, sailing westward, the sea calmer now, as though Poseidon himself had withdrawn his anger. The stars guided them bright beacons stitched across the heavens. Some say that Cassiopeia, the queen whose vanity had caused her daughter's peril, was set among those stars as punishment chained to her chair in the sky, turning eternally in the night, sometimes upright, sometimes upside down, a reminder of the dangers of pride. Perhaps you have seen her constellation yourself, gentle dreamer, a crooked W, etched across autumn skies. At last, Perseus and Andromeda reached Seriphos, where Danae awaited them. Imagine that reunion, a mother embracing not only her son returned, but a daughter gained her arms wide enough to enfold them both. The fisherman Dictys welcomed them, his hut too small now for the family that destiny had bound together. Yet amid the joy of return, there still lingered the memory of prophecy, as faint and cold as a draft slipping under the door. For though Polydectes was gone and Seriphos safe, Perseus's story was not yet finished. Acrisius, his grandfather, still lived in Argos, and the words of the oracle spoken so long ago in Delphi's smoke had not been unspoken. A shadow still stretched ahead, dark and patient. So let us leave them here for a moment, in the fragile glow of reunion, Danae smiling through her tears, Andromeda, radiant beside her husband Perseus, resting at last with the sea winds carrying the scent of olives and salt. The future presses near, yet for this night there is peace. Breathe with them, gentle dreamer. The hall is quiet now. The torches flicker low, and the stars lean close as though watching the next steps of fate unfold. The winds of destiny, dear listener, have a way of guiding heroes even when they long for rest. Perseus, though content with Andromeda at his side, and Danae safe upon Seriphos, could not escape the tug of Argos. His mother's homeland called to him, like a distant drumbeat that echoes across the years. He might have remained on the island living in peace as a husband and son, but peace rarely settles long on the shoulders of those who have brushed so closely with gods. And so after many wanderings, Perseus's feet turned again toward the land of his birth. Acrisius, his grandfather, still lived. Do you remember him, gentle dreamer, the king of Argos, who had locked his only daughter in a chamber of bronze, who had cast her and her infant into the sea, all to avoid a prophecy that one day his grandson would end his life? Time had not eased the burden of those words. Acrisius ruled uneasily his crown, heavy his heart forever haunted. He trusted no stranger, feared every shadow, and yet no man, however cautious, can guard against fate forever. It was in the city of Larissa that destiny drew the two together. The king there was hosting funeral games in honor of his dead father, contests of strength and speed of music, and display all dedicated to the gods. Such gatherings, dear listener, were beloved by the Greeks. They were more than entertainment. They were offerings, living prayers of the body. A race was a hymn of speed. A wrestling match was a chorus of strength. A discus hurled through the sky was an echo of the sun's daily arc. Perseus, passing through Larissa, joined the games as guest and competitor. By then, his name was already spreading across the Aegean. Word of the youth who had slain the Gorgon had traveled faster than the winged sandals themselves. Crowds hushed when he appeared on the field, whispering to one another, pointing, craning their necks. Some called him blessed by the gods. Others muttered that such gifts carried curses. But all eyes fixed upon him, eager to see what marvels he might display. And Acrisius too was among them. Perhaps curiosity drew him there, or perhaps he had heard the rumors of a young hero named Perseus, and something in his old bones whispered recognition. He came as any man might to sit among the crowd and watch the feats of youth, but the threads of prophecy had already drawn him to that place. Picture the stadium, dear listener, the dust rising from the feet of runners, the cheers swelling as one athlete toppled another in wrestling the thrum of lyres between contests offering music to Apollo. And then the hush as Perseus stepped forward to take up the discus. It was a great disc of polished stone, smooth beneath his fingers, heavy as destiny itself. Perseus weighed it in his hands, feeling its pull, its promise. Around him, the crowd leaned forward, breath held. He set his stance, shoulders, broad, knees, bent the sunlight, flashing on Athena's shield strapped across his back. He spun once, twice, and with a cry hurled the discus into the air. How it flew higher, farther than any thrown that day. The stone cut a shining arc against the sky, glimmering like a second sun, and the crowd roared in amazement. Yet even as their cheers rose, a murmur ran through them, then a gasp. For the discus carried by fate's invisible hand did not land harmlessly in the dust. It veered sharp as a hawk diving for prey and struck a man standing at the edge of the field. The sound was dull, final. The figure staggered, fell. The crowd fell silent. Perseus, chest heaving, ran forward, the thrill of triumph draining into horror. He pushed through the gathering onlookers until he stood above the fallen man. His breath caught. His heart froze, for the man lying broken in the dust was none other than Acrisius, his grandfather, king of Argos, who had come to Larissa to witness the games. Ah, gentle dreamer, can you feel the stillness of that moment? Years of fear, of cruelty, of exile, all spun from a prophecy spoken in Delphi's smoke, now ended by a single throw in a field of sport. Acrisius, who had locked Danae in a chamber of bronze, who had cast her and her infant into the sea, who had lived under the shadow of dread, had met his end not by spear or rebellion, but by accident. A discus, arcing through the air, like the hand of the fates themselves, had fulfilled what all his scheming could not escape. Perseus knelt beside him, grief etched into his face. He had not sought his grandfather's death. He bore no hatred, though he had suffered from Acrisius's fear. And yet here lay the truth, the oracle had been fulfilled. The grandson had killed the king. Not with vengeance, but with inevitability. In Greek, thought, dear listener, this was no coincidence. The ancients believed that fate Moira was inexorable, that even the gods themselves bowed to the weavings of the three sisters, Clotho, who spun the thread of life, Lachesis, who measured it, and Atropos, who cut it. Acrisius had tried to twist that thread, to lock it in bronze, to cast it upon the sea. But the thread had unspooled, and here it reached its appointed end. The crowd, stunned, looked upon Perseus, not with anger, but with awe. They knew this was no crime, but the work of destiny. Acrisius had lived too long in defiance of the oracle. Now the words had found their mark. What could Perseus do? He lifted his head, the discus still lying in the dust, and declared that he would not sit upon the throne of Argos, not with blood, however accidental, upon his hands. He could not rule the land of his grandfather, for the weight of fate hung too heavily there. And so, in an act of humility, rare among kings, he exchanged thrones with another ruler, Megapenthus, son of Proetus. Perseus took instead the land of Tyrans, where he would build great walls and found a line of kings. From his union with Andromeda would spring children and children's children, until at last Heracles himself was born a hero, greater still, who would carry the weight of the world upon his shoulders. Thus, the tale of Perseus does not end in grief, but flows into the wider river of myth, its currents carrying strength and sorrow alike. But for now, let us remain upon the field of Larissa. The dust still settles. The discus lies mute, its gleam dulled by tragedy. Acrisius, once a king, lies silent, at last freed from his fear, by the very fate he dreaded. Perseus stands above him, not in triumph, but in awe, knowing that he has touched the strange, cold hand of prophecy and felt its truth. Close your eyes, gentle dreamer. Imagine the hush of the stadium, the olive trees swaying in the distance, the murmurs of the crowd fading into stillness. The circle is complete. The prophecy spoken so long ago has closed upon itself like a snare. And the hero, heavy with the knowledge of fate's inescapable web, walks onward into the shadows of history. The prophecy had been fulfilled, dear listener. Acrisius was gone, and with him, the long shadow that had darkened Danae's life and haunted Perseus's youth. Yet as we so often find in these tales, the ending of one thread becomes the beginning of another. The world does not stop for grief or triumph. It flows onward, weaving each life into the greater fabric of myth. Perseus now, more than a youth and more than a hero, chose not to claim Argos. Though by blood and fate it was his, the land felt weighted with sorrow. How could he sit on the throne of the man whose death had come by his hand, however unintentional? Instead, he made a pact with Megapenthes, son of Proetus, and exchanged Argos for the kingdom of Tyrans. It was there, upon rocky ground, where the sea winds blew strong, that he raised new walls and founded a city that would carry his name. Andromeda stood with him, queen beside king, her presence as steady as the stars that had once watched her chained upon the rocks. Together, they raised children, sons and daughters, whose blood carried the mingling of mortal endurance and divine spark. Among their descendants would come kings' warriors, and most famously, Heracles, the great-shouldered hero, who would one day carry the weight of Olympus's labors. Thus, Perseus's legacy stretched far beyond his own lifetime, a stone dropped into the river of history, sending ripples through ages. Danae, too, found rest at last. No longer hunted by her father's fear, she lived her days in peace, cherished by her son and daughter-in-law, honored as the woman who had endured so much and yet never let despair consume her. One imagines her walking the courtyards of Tyrans, sunlight on her hair, telling her grandchildren stories of the sea, of the chest of the day. Golden rain fell upon bronze walls. And what of the head of Medusa, that dreadful prize, which had turned tyrants and monsters alike to stone Perseus, did not keep it as a personal weapon forever. In time, he gave it to Athena, who set it in the center of her aegis, her shield, so that its power might serve as a ward for justice rather than a tool of vengeance. In art, even now, you may see her, with the Gorgon's face, upon her breastplate, eyes, wide mouth, open in eternal cry, no longer a horror in the shadows, but a symbol of divine protection. Thus the tale of Perseus, closes not with the endless hunger of tragedy, but with balance, the oracle's words grim as they were found their fulfillment. Yet from that fulfillment came new beginnings, the safety of Danae, the love of Andromeda, the founding of Tyrans, the lineage of heroes to come. The Greeks, who so often dwelled on sorrow here, allowed themselves a gentler ending, one that acknowledged the inevitability of fate, yet also the endurance of hope. And what might we drifting toward sleep draw from this tale? Perhaps it is that no wall, however strong, can keep fate from finding its way. Perseus built his bronze chamber, yet the gods slipped through as golden rain. He cast his daughter into the sea, yet she was carried to safety. He fled his prophecy all his life, yet it found him in the simple arc of a discus. Fear built his choices, but fear was never strong enough to halt what was woven. But Perseus's story shows something more tender, that within fate there is also space for courage, for cunning, for kindness. The gods gave him tools, but it was his heart that carried them to use. He saved Andromeda not only because he could, but because he saw her worth. He freed his mother not only from a tyrant, but from years of trembling. He bore the burden of Medusa's head, not for pride, but to protect. So let us close our eyes now, gentle dreamer, and let the images fade softly into night. Bronze walls gleaming in shadow, a chest rocking on the sea, a boy growing strong beneath a fisherman's roof, a shield polished bright as a mirror, a sword flashing under moonlight, a monster slain in silence, a maiden unchained by the surf, a tyrant turned to stone, a discus flying through the sky. These fragments strung together form a story that has been told for thousands of years, a lullaby of fate, of fear, of love, of endurance. And as the ancients did, let us place the tale gently back among the stars. For there, they say, Perseus himself shines still, a constellation etched against the heavens, forever carrying Medusa's head, forever guarding Andromeda, who glimmers nearby. Look up on a clear night, and perhaps you will see him, a reminder that even within destiny's netlight and love endure. So sleep now, dear listener. Let the waves of time carry you gently. Let Perseus's journey fade into dream. The prophecy is fulfilled, the hero rests, and the story, like the night closes its eyes. Sweet dreams.